Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Angamai Ki Jai. Yamunamai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakti. Gaura Premanand.
Very Bol.
All glories to these.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All
Hare
glories
Hare
to
Bol.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Sri Dham Mayapur. Thank you for joining us this morning for our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We continue our study of the third canto, fourth chapter. Today's text is number 21. Soham tad darshanachlada viyogarti yuta prabho gamishye daitam tasya Padarya mandalam. Soham tad darshanachlada viyogarti yuta prabho Tamishye daitam tasya Padarya mandalam. Soham tad darshanachlada viyogarti yuta prabho Gamishye daitam tasya Badar Rama Mandalam. Please chant.
Soham tad darsanahlada viyogarti yutha prabho gamishye daitam tasya badrayashrama mandalam.
Soham tad darshanahlada viyogarti yuto prabho gamishye daitam tasya badarayashrama mandalam.
Hare Krishna.
Darshanalada Yogarti Yuta Prabho Kamishe Daitam Tasya Vadaryashram Mandalam.
Hare Krishna. Soham tad darsanaladha yogarthi yuta prabho gamishye daitam tasya badariyashrama mandalam. Hare Krishna.
Soham taddarshanalada viyogarti yuta prabho gamishye daitam tasya badarayashramam mandalam.
Okay. Saha aham, thus myself. Tat is. Darshana, audience. Ahlada, pleasure. Viyoga, without that. Arti yutaha, afflicted by distress. Prabho, my dear sir. Gamishye, shall go. Daitam, so instructed. Tasya, is. Badaryashramaha, Badarik Ashrama in the Himalayas. Mandalam, association. Translation by Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. My dear Vidura, this is Uddhava speaking. My dear Vidura, now I am mad for want of the pleasure of seeing him. And just to mitigate this, I am now proceeding to Badarik Ashram in the Himalayas for association as I have been instructed by him. Purport. A pure devotee of the Lord, of the standard of Uddhava, constantly associates with the Lord in the double perception of simultaneous separation and meeting. The pure devotee is not for a moment unengaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. Execution of the Lord's service is the main occupation of the pure devotee. Uddhava's separation from the Lord was unbearable. Therefore, he started to Badarik Ashrama in obedience to the Lord's order, because the order of the Lord and the Lord himself are identical. As long as one is engaged in the execution of the order of the Lord, there is no factual separation from him. The translation again. My dear Vidura, now I am mad for want of the pleasure of seeing him. And just to mitigate this, I am now proceeding to Badarik Ashrama in the Himalayas for association as I have been instructed by him. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutave Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityamane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Vicharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshataya Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So here again, we hear how Uddhava cannot tolerate even a moment of separation from Krishna. This theme has been coming up throughout the last several chapters. A pure devotee cannot tolerate even a moment of separation without Krishna. And there are different ways for devotees to associate with Krishna. And as pointed out here, one doesn't necessarily have to be in what we perceive as the physical presence of Krishna to actually be associating with Krishna. So association doesn't depend on perception through the material senses, because the spiritual senses, of which the pure devotee has complete access to, all the functions of each of the senses can perform the all of the senses can perform the functions of all of the other senses. So the pure devotee, although not seeing with his material eyes the form of Krishna, is actually associating with Krishna, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out in the purport, because the order of the Lord and the Lord himself are identical. So as long as one is constantly engaged in Krishna's service, that's actually association with Krishna. So I want to actually go through this. This purport is very short, but each sentence is very meaningful. So I'm going to go through this purport again, comment a little bit on that, and then there are a few other instances where this concept is brought up throughout Bhagavatam. So I want to address those and then talk about those. So Srila Prabhupada starts out his purport, saying that a pure devotee of the Lord of the standard of Uddhava constantly associates with the Lord in double perception of simultaneous separation and meeting. So it means that for a pure devotee on the standard of Uddhava, not just an aspiring devotee, but one who is pure like Uddhava, He's constantly associating with the Lord, even though he's not seeing the Lord with his material eyes. The next sentence is fantastic, because if we want to know what it means to be a pure devotee, this sentence will tell us. The pure devotee is not for a moment unengaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. So we aspiring devotees are aspiring to get to this point where every moment we are actually engaged in service of the Lord. Now, we talked about this word engaged maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. Engaged doesn't just mean, so usually when we talk about being engaged in Christian service, usually we just think that means doing some sort of activity that is predetermined as Christian service, sweeping the temple room floor, serving out prasad, cooking for the deities, etc. But the term engaged, if we think of it in terms of machinery, for example, and we gave the example of a car's clutch, the transmission and the clutch, how the engine can be moving very powerful rate, but unless the transmission is engaged, the car's not really going to go anywhere. And so, although we can be performing what seems to be Christian service, if we're not properly, if our consciousness isn't properly engaged, in other words, if we're not actually seeing the activity or considering that the motive behind our activity, if our motive isn't actually and exclusively, without a tinge of anything else, to serve Krishna, if we are either expecting anything material out of it, or if we are considering ourselves the doer of the activity, therefore the cause of the result of said activity, then we're not actually engaged in Christian service. We're trying to engage in Christian service. We're aspiring to engage in Christian service. But pardon me. Pardon me. But the engagement, it means that we are fully aware. Full motive is only to please Krishna, and to everything else we are completely detached. And this is what pure devotional service means. It's what a pure devotee, it's how the characteristics of a pure devotee. So we aspiring devotees, we are to get motivation and inspiration and follow the examples of such pure devotees. The next sentence, execution of the Lord's service is the main occupation of the pure devotee. So just in case we don't understand what engagement means, and we misunderstood the previous sentence, execution of the Lord's service is the main occupation of the pure devotee. So we aspiring devotees, we have a lot of different occupations. We spend our time from day to day many different ways. And each of those things that we do can certainly be engaged in Krishna service properly. But we find that many of the things we do, execution of the Lord's service, in other words, the activities that we're doing, pleasing the Supreme Lord by doing these activities according to his instructions that are given in Shastra, isn't always the forefront of our mind. We conditioned living entities have a tendency to give a whole lot of value to our conditioned nature, the experiences that we've had in our lifetime, the knowledge that we have acquired, so basically the experiences and the knowledges that we've acquired through our material body, material senses. We tend to put a lot more stock in that, in what we what we have come to understand how life works and how service works, than actual authorized scriptures telling us how we should see. This is our tendency. But we find out as time goes on, engaging in trying to engage, aspiring to engage in devotional service in this incomplete way, this way of filtering our understanding of devotional service through our conditioning. We find that over time, it's not actually producing the optimal results, right? So when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we understand that as we follow this very scientific process, a lot of purification happens, a lot of clarity happens. We start seeing the world truly as it is. The illusion starts going away. All the qualities of the devatas become manifest in one who is engaging in devotional service. So all of these things, these are concomitant factors. These things happen automatically. Pardon me. And so if we find that our version of aspiring devotional service isn't actually producing these concomitant factors, these natural side effects, we should come to the conclusion that there is actually something wrong with our application, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with the process. The process is pure, the spiritual process. And we can see this just if we go to the basis of spirituality, understanding the difference between spirit and matter. Matter goes through 6 transformations, comes into being, it remains for some time, it grows, it produces some byproduct, it gradually dwindles, and it dies. All material things go through these, whether it's a thing, whether it's a conception, an idea. This is the nature of material things, activities, whatever. The nature of spirit is that it is eternal. And that is fully cognizant. That means it's full of knowledge. There's no mistake at all. It's fully aware. And it's full of bliss. So that's the nature of spirit. So we see the stark difference between the two. So spiritual knowledge it's eternal, it's non-changing, it's free from all doubt, it's fully cognizant, and it's full of bliss. There's no misery involved. So if we think or we consider that although we have access to bona fide Shastra, which is non-different from Krishna, so we're about to read again this purport to be reminded of, if we think that somehow our conditioned experiences, our life experiences, the things that we've gone through and have determined the way the world works, if we think that is more valuable or more reliable than what is coming in Shastra, then we're going to get very different results because, again, it's a science. It's a very precise science. And anyone who's performed any activity that requires, instructions, whether it's baking or driving or anything, you have to follow a process properly if you want the right results. If you don't follow the process correctly, you get less than perfect results, right? If we don't know how to properly drive a car, but we have a feeling about it based on our experiences with a bicycle, for example, and we try to operate it in a similar way. Instead of pushing the accelerator to go forward and the brake to stop, we just kind of go like this with our feet, and we think, okay, if I keep going like this, I'm going to go like on a bicycle. So this sort of ludicrous mentality is the same as trying to filter what Shastra is telling us clearly through our conditioned experience, right? So it doesn't work out very well. We don't get the result that we expect. So we have to be very careful about this. So the main occupation of the pure devotee is execution of the Lord's service. That's it. That's their motive. They want to perform what it is that the Lord wants. They don't want to do what they want and try to at least bring it in line with what the Lord is suggesting in the Shastra, right? That's an aspiring devotee. That's what we do. We already know what we want to do, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is somehow beneficial to our spiritual upliftment. Therefore, we will consult the scriptures to see if we're doing, the thing that we're desiring to do, at least in an acceptable way according to religion, right? So we tend to basically adjust religion to suit our desires. Whereas what we're meant to do is we're meant to take the religious process as it is and adjust our lives to suit that process. And that's what the pure devotees do. So their main occupation is execution of the Lord's service. That's it. They're not concerned with self-preservation or maintenance or anything like that. They want to serve the Lord. If the Lord wants them to be in a cold environment, they're in a cold environment. If the Lord wants them to be in a hot environment, they're in a hot environment. If the Lord wants them to suffer ailments, then he'll suffer ailments, whatever needs to happen. If the Lord calls him back to the spiritual world and that's that, then that's what he does. The main occupation is just executing the Lord's service, whatever that may be, right? And so obviously we have to get the Lord's, we have to understand what the Lord's service is through the authorized Shastra. And our guru, our bona fide guru, will instruct us on how to do that according to the Shastra. And the sadhus will show by their example how we can practically apply these things according, again, to Shastra. Srila Prabhupada continues his purport. Uddhava's separation from the Lord was unbearable, which, again, we've gone over several times in the last few chapters. And therefore, he started to Badarik Ashram in obedience to the Lord's order, because the order of the Lord and the Lord himself are identical. So this concept we have to understand, the order of the Lord and the Lord himself are identical. So we know Krishna is different from, or non-different from his name. When we say the word Krishna, he's there. He's dancing on our tongue. Whether or not we're receiving him properly, that's another thing. But he's not different, so he's there. And the order of the Lord is also non-different. So if we are following the order of the Lord to the extent that our motive is to please the Lord and not to please ourselves or to think ourselves the doer of pleasing, to what extent we are detached and only desiring to please the Lord with no misunderstanding that we are somehow the doers of any of that. To that extent, we will understand the Supreme Lord, and we will have his association just in serving him. So Uddhava, he was instructed to go to Badarik Ashram, so that's what he's doing. And in doing that, he is seeing Krishna. He's interacting with Krishna. Srila Prabhupada concludes his purport. As long as one is engaged in the execution of the order of the Lord, there is no factual separation from him. So again, this is the nature of spirit. It's eternal. It can't be diminished by material circumstances. So the material circumstance, because Uddhava was here on this earthly planet when Krishna was here, and after Krishna physically left this earthly planet, of course, he can't really leave the earthly planet because he's everywhere. He's within everything. But Krishna Svayam Bhagavan Krishna, who was performing his pastimes on the planet, when he left the material vision of Uddhava, he got instructions of what to do next, direct instructions from Krishna, what to do next. So in him following that, that's non-different from actually being with Krishna, and that's the way he's perceiving it. So this is how he's going. Now for us, how we apply this, it's a little different because Uddhava actually got personal instructions from Krishna himself. We have access because Krishna is within all of our hearts. We have access to Krishna's instructions, but since we're so covered with so many countless layers of the modes of material nature, we can't always, even though whenever we have an inkling of sincerity, Krishna will always nudge us in the right direction. It doesn't mean we won't nudge him back, because our material mind is also quite powerful. So our minds tend to say, no, you don't have to surrender to Krishna. You just keep trying to enjoy, and one day we'll figure it out. One day we'll figure out this pursuit of happiness, and we'll actually be able to attain the bliss we're looking for. But don't worry about, this other, right? This is what the mind will do. So we have to be able to distinguish that voice in our head that's our mind telling us to enjoy, and Krishna in the heart nudging us in the right direction to actually pursue spiritual knowledge. We have to be able to understand the difference between the two. And the way to do that is to study Shastra under the bona fide instructions of the Guru and following the examples of the sadhus. There's no other way. If we try, again, on our own intellectual prowess, or we draw off of our own conditioned experiences and we try to manufacture a different way to get to God, it's not going to work. We have to consult the authorized literatures. And when we do that, we will find that Krishna and his instructions are identical. So we'll see that. So we've just read about how the Yadu dynasty wrapped up their pastime, how Krishna wrapped up his. Previously, we read about how the Pandavas and even Dhritarashtra, what they did after Krishna left. So now we're finding out what Vidura did. And everybody's doing different things, right? So the Pandavas, they understood, okay, this is it. There's really no reason for us to be in this particular planet anymore, because our service is wherever Krishna is going next, right? And that's what we're going to do. So they went off into the forest to meditate. They left their bodies. That was it. That's all they needed, right? Their mission here was complete. It didn't require, putrefied rice and iron infused reeds to get rid of the Pandavas. No, the Yadus, that's what they had to do. Otherwise, there was still that burden on the earth. Even a positive influence can be a burden to the earth. So Krishna, anyway, he wrapped up his pastimes in various different ways. We see how his devotees are doing different things. And so Uddhava, he was instructed, you go to Badarik Ashram. That was a personal instruction. So it's not that he, who is also a very close devotee of Krishna, would then just immediately leave. No, he had some other service to do. This is the service that Krishna gave him, so that's what he's doing. And as long as he's doing that, he's not feeling any separation from Krishna, right? So there are a few other excerpts that I would like to read. This one is from the chapter entitled The Pandavas Retire Timely, first canto, 15th chapter, verse 28 purport. Srila Prabhupada says that since the Lord is absolute, deep meditation on him is as good as yogic trance. The Lord is non-different from his name, form, qualities, pastimes, entourage, and specific actions. Arjuna began to think of the Lord's instructions to him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Only those instructions began to eliminate the tinges of material contamination in the mind of Arjuna. The Lord is like the sun. The sun's appearance means immediate dissipation of the appearance of the sun means immediate dissipation. Hare Krishna. The appearance of the sun means immediate dissipation of darkness or ignorance. And the Lord's appearance within the mind of a devotee can at once drive away the miserable material effects. Lord Chaitanya has therefore recommended constant chanting of the name of the Lord for protection from all contamination of the material world. The feeling of separation from the Lord is undoubtedly painful to the devotee, but because it is in connection with the Lord, it has specific transcendental effect, which pacifies the heart. So even this pain and separation, because it's separation from the Lord, it actually has a transcendental effect, and it actually increases our love of Krishna, even though technically it feels painful since it's related to the Lord, and it's related to a longing to have that connection again. It's increasing that desire to see him. So then when we do see him again, that bliss is then increased. So the nature, again, the difference between spirit and matter goes through the 6 transformations, and it's eternal. So happiness, material happiness, it comes into being, it grows for some time. You hit an apex, the best of it. And honestly, the build up to the best is actually usually more relishable than the peak, because as soon as we're at the peak, we know that it's going downhill. But spiritual bliss, it's always increasing. So it's always on that upward swing, and it never comes to a peak. It never plateaus. It never drops off. It's constantly moving up. So sometimes this pain of seeming separation, not actual separation, as was mentioned in today's purport, because they're constantly associating with Krishna in their meditation on him in separation. But then when that reunion is there, it's so much sweeter. So the bliss is always increasing. Srila Prabhupada continues this purport, 150.28. Feelings of separation are also sources of transcendental bliss, and they are never comparable to contaminated material feelings of separation. So currently, we only have access to memories of material separation, what that feels like. And so we have a hard time understanding how that can actually be a good thing, right? But at least when we read about, for example, the gopis' feelings of separation from Krishna, when we become more mature and we can understand philosophically what's actually going on, and beyond philosophically, because rasa is higher than tattva, once we can start to tap into that, we can actually appreciate that, yes, this separation can be quite a blissful thing, unlike the separation that we feel in this material world. The next thing I want to read from is the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 25, verse 2 purport. So, by his teachings, by his instructions, Krishna's instructions, by everything connected with him, so anything, he enlivens the senses. So his instructions, his teachings, his paraphernalia, his entourage, etc., his name, all non-different from him. Whatever he instructs is from the transcendental platform, and his instructions, being absolute, are non-different from him. Basically, it's the same sentence. Krishna's instructions are non-different. Hearing from Krishna, or his expansion or plenary expansion, like Kapila, is very pleasing to the senses. Bhagavad Gita can be read or heard many times, but because it gives great pleasure, the more one reads Bhagavad Gita, the more he gets the appetite to read and understand it. And each time he gets new enlightenment. I'm sure most of us have had this experience. The more we read through Bhagavad Gita, the more we realize that we've missed on our previous reading. Oh, I didn't actually catch that deeper aspect. So we see that. The more we read, the more Srila Prabhupada continues. That is the nature of the transcendental message. Similarly, we find that transcendental happiness in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The more we hear and chant the glories of the Lord, the more we become happy. So this is the process, this is the understanding that The Shastra, being Krishna's instructions, are non-different from Krishna. And so when we follow that, we're actually associating with Krishna. On the other hand, when we're following our whims, our conditioned behaviors, we're not associating with Krishna, we're associating with our conditioned nature. And so the result of that is that we remain in this material world. If we're doing what's considered in this material world positive activities, then we will get to reap the benefit of those positive activities in the form of material enjoyment or comfort. If we are doing what is considered to be negative, impious activities, then we will reap the punishments of said activities. But whether good or bad, if it's in the material world, it's actually, as Lord Chaitanya points out in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's actually just all bad because it's temporary, it's material, it's not substantial, it's a shadow. So we don't want to experience the so-called spiritual path filtered through our own material perceptions. We want to actually experience the spiritual path. So earlier today, we were discussing here in Mayapur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita. And in that book, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur encourages us that as soon as we have the desire for spiritual advancement, as soon as we understand, even in theory, that the spiritual path is the only way, that the material path has nothing for us. As soon as we come to that understanding, it is imperative that we study Shastra, because that's the Lord's instructions. Because we know that if we just follow our whims, we're going to continue on this material path. But if we've already concluded that the material path isn't for us because we're spiritual beings, we're out of place in this material world, we're just wasting time. And if we know that it's a waste of time, then we should avoid it at all costs. And the way to avoid that is to engage in understanding Shastra. And we do that in different ways. We do that directly by reading Shastra. But even that, there's room for misinterpretation. So we have to take the instructions of the guru, right? The bona fide guru who's authorized, who has seen the truth, Tattva Darshana. He's actually seen the truth, and so therefore he can give it to us if we inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. And then there are the sadhus, meaning they're also gurus, they're shiksha gurus. They're other aspiring transcendentalists who can show through example how they've gotten over various obstacles that we are also now encountering, right? So we need to find a healthy balance of these things. If we don't have an understanding of Shastra, we'll have a hard time determining who's bona fide guru and which activities of the sadhus we should be learning from. So if we're focusing too much on one or the other, we may not be actually getting. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur starts out his Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita pointing out, after offering obeisances, of course, to Radha Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, he says that there are countless philosophies, and all of them, each of them is incomplete and mutually contradictory because they are based on, they go through this filter of our material condition. So they're imperfect. They can't be perfect. But when we come in contact with the true spiritual process as given in the Shastra, and if we are able to properly understand it, then we can make some advancement. So he points out also, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that the Mayavadis, they also quote Shastra. So it's not that just knowing Shastra is enough. We have to understand how to understand Shastra. The Shastra speaks to us in a very specific way. There's an example of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Prior to meeting Lord Chaitanya, he was a Mayavadi, a very well-renowned scholar. He used to actually train the sannyasis in Vedanta, very highly revered. And when he first saw Lord Chaitanya, he noticed that there are many transcendental symptoms that Lord Chaitanya had. But he saw him through his material eyes as an immature sannyasi who was a bit sentimental, and he wanted to educate him. He actually had good intentions. He thought, okay, this is what I do. I educate sannyasis in Vedanta. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this favor for this young sannyasi. And so Lord Chaitanya, of course, agreed. Okay, yes, I will listen to you speak on Vedanta, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya spoke for 7 days straight on Vedanta, but the Mayavad interpretation of Vedanta. And when he saw that Lord Chaitanya wasn't reacting in any way, or he didn't have any sort of look of interest on his face, he wasn't asking any questions, nothing like that, he stopped and he said to Lord Chaitanya, are you getting anything out of this? Do you understand what I'm saying? I've been, preaching for, and I'm not even getting any sort of feedback from you. I don't know if you're understanding or if, whatever. So do you understand Vedanta? And Lord Chaitanya said to him, yes, I do understand Vedanta completely, but the stuff you're talking about, that I don't understand at all, because that's not Vedanta. So although Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is quoting Shastra, he didn't understand the heart of the Shastra, the principle of the Shastra. Externally, sure, he was able to quote so many things, but since it was tinged by that Mayavad understanding, or misunderstanding, Shastra wasn't actually being properly addressed. It wasn't being understood. And so Lord Chaitanya then, when he's instructing Sanatana Goswami, which is what his Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book on Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, it's based on that conversation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Sanatana Goswami. So when Lord Chaitanya was instructing Srila Sanatana Goswami on how to properly approach the Shastra, how to understand it, he said that there are 3 things that the Shastra will always address. And if you're speaking on Shastra, but you're not addressing these 3 things, then you're not actually talking about Shastra. So the Mayavads, for example, they don't talk about these 3 things that are necessary. And that's Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Understanding the relationship between we, the living entities, infinitesimal part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and the infinite whole Supreme Personality of Godhead, that relationship, the ultimate goal, which is to properly engage all of our thoughts, minds, words, activities, in his service properly, and the process to get from where we are to that ultimate goal. That's the Abhideya. So Sambandha, Prayojana, Abhideya. If we're discussing scriptures and we're not addressing these 3 things, we're not actually discussing scriptures, right? We're referring to scriptures to discuss material things. Because spirituality means these 3 things: understanding what that relationship is, understanding what that ultimate goal is, and then determining how to get to that goal from where we are by following the instructions in the Shastra, right? So that's actually Shastra. And this is how we can engage in the execution of the Lord at all times and never have the danger of feeling or actually being in separation from him. Of course, there will be some transcendental separation from time to time, which will then increase our connection. Let's stop here and see if there are any topics of discussion, questions or comments. It looks like Sundari Leela has unmuted. Do you have something to add?
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Wonderful
Hare Krishna.
class. Thank you so much. I really feel like I benefited from hearing this.
Oh, you're kind.
My question has to do with the conditioning, the particular circumstances under which we are raised as children.
Yes.
And we all experience different backgrounds. And it seems that those early years are very influential in how we perceive the world and how we perceive our needs versus our wants.
Yes.
So as we mature in our devotional service, hopefully we are able to discriminate more and more between what is actually our need and what is actually our want. But
Yes.
at our very immature phase, how do we determine that? Because the
How do we determine
conditioning
what's
is so
actually, yes.
strong. Yeah, what's actually needed for Krishna's service. We're raising
Yes.
children. We're probably raising them in a similar fashion to the way we were raised. Are we
Yes.
just acting in a material way, or are we,
Yes.
do the
Okay.
children,
So,
you know, how many material activities should we include in their diet? Like, I get confused about all of this.
yes, very good. Great question. So I'm glad that you added that last part about children, the next generation, because for us, it's kind of, it's too late to do what's usually advised. And usually the advice is, you know, if we want lasting positive, or not even positive, because again, in material world, positive and negative are both negative. If we want actual transcendental impressions, then the scriptures actually recommend what are called samskaras, these impressions. We get impressions no matter what. And so if at the various phases in our life, we make sure that those impressions are actually positive. Again, I don't want to use the word positive because it still has that material connotation. The transcendental impressions that are going to actually not just remind us of Krishna, but remind us of our relationship to Krishna, what our goal is, and how to attain that goal. The more we do that, especially with the newer generation, the better. And so Shastra gives us detailed instructions on how to do that for our children. Now, for us who didn't get that, and we have to sort of counteract all of the what we'll call material samskaras, the negative ones. This process automatically, I just used the word and I forgot it, counteracts. This process automatically will counteract it if we're engaging in it sincerely. So as we surrender unto Krishna, he rewards us accordingly, meaning as our sincerity grows to actually understand the truth, Krishna gives us the opportunity to encounter that truth, whether he's sending us a particular devotee, or he's putting us through a particular experience, or if he's leading us to a particular part of the Shastra. He will do that. Now, like I said, sometimes Paramatma within, he's nudging us in the right directions, but sometimes we nudge back because we think, no. We confuse Paramatma in the mind and two different voices in our heads, and we think, no, it's better that I do this. And we'll even, after a while, because the mind's very tricky, we'll start quoting Shastra as to why we should be, engaging sense gratification instead of spirituality. So, like you said, when we're immature, it's difficult to understand the difference between necessity and just something that we want. But the process, it's quite clear, but we have to approach it with sincerity and with honesty. If we try to cheat the system, which many of us do, we will find that we're not going to get a really good result. And there are plenty of litmus tests to see if we're following the process properly. Plenty of citations. I mentioned, I didn't say the reference number, but I mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 18, verse 12. where all the qualities of the devatas automatically become manifest in one who is engaged in devotional service, such as knowledge and detachment. There are other verses that explain that. So one exercise that I like to give aspiring devotees is to take a look at some of those lists. There are several lists that are given that talk about the qualities of the devotees, or qualities that are in knowledge, and the rest are considered ignorance. So take a look at one of those lists, the 26 qualities of devotees, any of these lists that describe these qualities, and find one that you're most attracted to. Right? Then once you find one that you say, okay, yeah, that's a really good quality. Once you pick out that particular quality, think of a devotee who just is an example of that quality, that under all circumstances, even in the face of adversity, that quality is always going to shine through, right? So think of first which quality we're most impressed by, and then someone who's imbibing that quality. Then through association, it's the next step is to try to understand how is it that that particular devotee is able to always, in the face of adversity, let that quality shine through. So we find out that, how they do that. And then we try to implement that in our own lives. Through the process of, we don't try to independently develop these qualities by, checking out self-help books from the library and finding out how, people can develop, for example, humility, because we don't just want material humility. We want our practice of bhakti to produce all of these concomitant factors, these side effects. And it's just a litmus test to see if these qualities aren't increasing. If these qualities are not increasing, then there's something in our application that is wrong. So we're immature, as you mentioned. So it's just diligence and proper sadhu sangha, proper permanent dedication. Now, the second part of your question, how much, do we put in our children's diet of what's recommended, and then what's just to keep them materially situated. Educate. There's a big discussion on education, because there's the Gurukul, of course, which if it's done properly, it actually teaches everything. It teaches every life skill you could possibly imagine. It teaches us how to interact with one another properly so that there's actual communication and not miscommunication. We see if it's done properly, it works, and it prepares the children for anything that life can throw at them. And that's the purpose of Shastra, to be able to successfully navigate through this material world and then move on to the transcendent. Now, there are examples of gurukuls who have focused maybe too much on tradition without actually having that connection, and to back to Krishna consciousness, where it's more about the external application of it and less of the actual connection. So when we see those bad examples, then we think, okay, no, just let's throw the whole system out, because it's not preparing these children to become productive members of society. We hear some of these arguments, and there's something to that. But as I mentioned, if we're doing it right, because we're following Shastra, and if we're showing the connection and just learning Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, how important it is to understand relationships, it doesn't only apply to Krishna consciousness. Anything we do, we have to understand relationship. So one thing that we all do every day is we brush our teeth, right? And so there are different things that we have in order to brush our teeth. There's the toothbrush, there's the toothpaste, there's the water that we're using, there's the sink. We have to know where to spit, which end of the toothbrush to hold, where to put the toothpaste. Are we putting the toothbrush in our ear? No, we're putting it in our mouth, and we're moving it in a certain way. all of these things are important, but the relationship is most important because we don't know the relationship between all these things. The toothpaste goes on the bristles, you hold the other end of it, you wet it a little bit so that it activates the, thing, and then you move it around. We have to know the relationships, otherwise we won't get the right result. And like, I was mentioning before with trying to drive a car with the experience that we had of driving a bicycle, it won't work out right. So maybe again, with brushing our teeth, we try to, well, I've stuck things in my mouth before I've eaten. So if we try to do it like that and we put the toothbrush in our mouth and we bite it and we, chew it up and swallow it, it's not necessarily going to have the same result of actually brushing our teeth. Our breath may be a little fresher because the toothpaste is in there for a while, but it's not, you understand what I'm saying? Is if we don't understand the idea of relationships, we're going to have very many problems in this material world. So we don't need to be trained in, economics and diplomacy and the things that Prahlad Maharaj's teachers were trying to teach him and how to be a good materialist. If we are properly trained in how to successfully become a spiritualist, how to successfully navigate through this material world, we can plug into any situation and become successful. And we've seen examples of that. We see examples of gurukuls who are actually teaching this proper connection. And these students that graduated, they can be successful in any field. And so it's great if they just, become full-time devotees, preachers, teachers, etc. But some go on to become successful business people or, whatever. So we see examples of that. So these are the ones we follow, and we have to pay attention to them, and we have to see what's working, what's not working. We have to make sure we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, etc. But the right balance is really going to depend on the parent. We have to understand that our children are growing up in different cultures, especially if we're living in, wherever we're living, whatever part of the world, there's different cultural norms. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Chaitanya Charitamrita is also explaining that there's so many different philosophies, and externally they'll look very different because there's different languages, there's different ways to dress, different things that they're eating, different presentations of the philosophy. But the actual philosophy is one because the nature of the soul is one, and everyone's trying to get back to that nature, but they're doing it in different ways. So naturally, there's going to be many different ways of doing that. But what we have to learn how to do is focus not on those external details, but the principle. And if we can focus on the principle, it doesn't matter what the details are. We can actually successfully get back on path to a proper Krishna consciousness relationship. So it doesn't matter if the kids are wearing a certain thing or eating a certain thing or all of that. If the principle is there of understanding what the relationship is, what the goal is, and how to successfully get from where we are to where we want to be, then everything else works out. Doesn't matter what the externals are. That was a really long answer. Did I actually address what you were asking, or did I go off on tangents? Sometimes I do that.
No, I believe, thank you so much, Prabhu. I believe that you answered, well, this is my understanding of what you're saying in just a couple of sentences.
Sure.
A lot depends on the subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and ego, and how we're conditioning that, how we're training that to see the world and see our place within the world, more than the actual physical acts that we're engaging in. And as long as the mind, intelligence, and ego are properly situated in our practice of raising children, then the hope is that they will embrace that and use that training in their lives, no matter what their career path becomes, whether or not they raise children themselves or take a more renounced position. I guess where I get confused is I raised 3 kids in the Gurukula system,
Mhm.
and I was pretty strict with
Mm.
the way I raised my children. I didn't allow them to get involved with media, occasionally, very, very little. And my daughter took to that process quite well. But my
Mhm.
2 sons are now in 2 different careers that have to do with IT, and
Mhm.
they're into video games, and they're in their
Mhm.
40s.
Mhm.
And I mean, one son definitely believes that Krishna is one way you can see God. But I feel like maybe they're grabbing what they didn't get as children, and I'm questioning my own
Mm.
strictness with their upbringing
Mm.
because they seem to have just really embraced this other kind of world.
Understood.
They're
So
following
two,
principles. I mean, they're
yeah.
vegetarian but they're just not spiritually absorbed.
Mhm. So two things that we have to always remember, just like, like I was saying, Krishna is there in the heart and he's nudging us in the right direction, and sometimes we nudge back. So when we're engaging in any service, there has to be an element of detachment because we are not the doer.
Mhm.
And so we always have to just make sure that we are doing our best according to what we understand from Shastra. And we have to constantly be making sure that we're getting a better and better understanding of Shastra so we keep making better decisions. But ultimately, it's up to Krishna. And in this case, ultimately, your children also have free will. So sometimes it's going to take and sometimes it's not. The important thing is that you did the best you could according to what you knew, and they made their decisions. So when we hear about the different natures of people, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the Brahmanas, they just instruct people on Shastra. It doesn't matter to them if the people actually listen to them, if they
Mm.
take the advice and apply it. Their service is not to make sure people follow it. Their service is to give it in a um, very direct and detached way. They don't put their own spin on it. They don't try to influence your opinion. They just say,
Mm.
well, Shastra said that's all a Brahmana will do because they're completely detached. They tell you what's in the Shastra, and it's up to you whether you go or not. Then you have the Kshatriyas that their natural inclination is to protect others. They have a little bit more passion, so they want to make sure that people are getting what they need. They want to make sure that people aren't being exploited, right? And so like I said, there's a little more passion there. So there's going to be a little bit more attachment there. Vaishyas, again, that there's a bit more passion, so they're more. I always forget this word too. Ambitious.
Mm.
They want to take a small thing and turn it into a bigger thing, right? To expand. And it doesn't matter what our nature is, whether we're Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. All of them can be engaged in Krishna service, right? But the Vaishnava principle means it doesn't matter what nature we have, even lower than Shudra, which most of us came from. The Vaishnava nature uh, is, of course, paradukha dukhi. We see the suffering of others, and it makes us suffer. But we do our best to give Krishna consciousness as it was presented to us, and we have to have that same sense of detachment. Krishna has that sense of detachment. He's very patiently waiting for us to turn right back to him. Srila Prabhupada has given us everything we need to become purely Krishna conscious in a moment. It doesn't necessarily even take a whole lifetime. In a moment, we have everything we need, but there are things that are holding us back. So we have to not be discouraged by the choices that people make that are under our counsel, but we can try to learn things. We can try to learn, okay, was there a different way I could have presented this? But ultimately, it's it's up to Krishna, and it's also up to the individual. But as long as we're doing our best according to our current understanding of Shastra, and we're trying to constantly get a better understanding and always trying to apply it, that's all we can do. After that, we have to be detached, and Krishna will test us with this. Did that address that part? Your questions are very intelligent.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you, Prabhu. I'm thinking about my grandchildren from my older son and how
Yeah.
I'm kind of applying, because they're not absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And but I'm with them, and my son and daughter-in-law are fine with me sharing Krishna with them. So they have deities, murtis in their bedrooms, and when I go there, we have kirtan, and I'm just chanting different verses. They're eager. They like to hear the Sanskrit. They love it, and sharing a little bit of philosophy. But I'm doing it in a much milder manner than I did with my own children. Because I'm not living it, right at the temple, and it's a whole different scenario. And so we'll see how this works.
Yes, see
it's
how it
kind of a
works.
trial and error
Because
process.
now you're in a different situation where you can't necessarily be exactly direct without, disrespecting the wishes, so yeah, it's one of those things where obviously it's easier having all of the right facilities to get a positive result, but it's possible. So it matter the distinguishing factor is always consciousness. Where does our consciousness lie? You can be performing all of the right things, but if we think that we're the doer, like, so this is the deal when we're engaged in spiritual life. We, especially when we first come in contact in this current life with the devotees, most of us noticed that we made some really rapid advancement very quickly, right? And really what was going on is we were picking up from where we left off in last life. So we just made some like serious advancement all at once. And then all of a sudden we seem to kind of stall out, right? And this can be quite discouraging, of course. I actually forgot where I was going with this. What was the last thing you said? We were talking about
Sorry.
I
I think I was
lost where I was going with it.
It's this process of trial and error where you hopefully learn some things from what you feel you may have exaggerated or done too much of or done too little of in raising your own children. And then now you have a new scenario. Can you have a gentler approach? Might that work better? I don't know. I think that's what I was saying, is the trial and error process.
So it depends on the circumstance. So children and grandchildren are different. And it sounds like you're doing exactly the right thing. And yeah, just with everything we do, and the hardest lesson to learn. Oh, that's where I was going with it because of the attachment. The hardest lesson to learn is to engage in devotional service with detachment. Because where I was going with that story is we make a whole bunch of progress all at once because we're catching up to, we're picking up where we left off from our last life. But we see that advancement and we consider this is something that I've done through my practice of devotional service. I've made this advancement. I've attained some qualities that I didn't have before, etc. And thinking we're the doer of that negates that in other words, we're no longer redirecting our consciousness to Krishna. We're directing it right back to I'm the center, I'm the controller, the enjoyer. So anytime we think we're the doer, we're not actually going to make advancement there, because basically we want the credit for ourselves, not Krishna. And so we remain in the material world to try to get that credit. And it's a tough one to kick, because generally in our experience is if we're asked to do our best on something, then we want credit when the results are good, right? If we're told that you have to be detached from it, then we don't want to do a thing. We just want to lie down and like, okay, well, if it doesn't have to do with my effort, then why am I going to do anything? Let me just lay back and Krishna, you do whatever you need to do. those are our tendencies, those two extremes. If you wanted me to be detached, then let me just lay here and be detached. But if you want me to actually perform some duty, then let me get the benefit of that. But that's material thinking. So it's very difficult to give that up. But when we do, when we successfully give that up, and usually it's from the mercy of, well, it's always from the mercy of Krishna, whether it's through the spiritual master or other devotees, we get this clarity and we start understanding that what we thought we were doing as selfless, unmotivated devotional service actually had maybe not the most obvious motive, but we definitely thought we were doing it. We considered ourselves the doer. And that's why we didn't make any advancement. So I have an example. We're kind of going over time, but in my personal life, try to make this as quick as possible. From the time I met the devotees and understood that, okay, this is the path for me, I wanted to open a preaching center. That was what I wanted to, that's how I wanted to repay my debt to Srila Prabhupada. Having just come back from studying Bhakti Shastri in Vrindavan, it was Prabhupada's centennial year, and all the devotees were coming up with ways that they could, honor Srila Prabhupada's legacy. And so my idea was, okay, I'm going to open a preaching center, much like 22nd Avenue, have that sort of mood and just try to, cultivate new devotees. And as time went on, this was always what I wanted to do. As time went on, that sort of evolved from just having a preaching center to bring in new people to actually have it very much focused around Shastric study. Because if we're not studying Shastra, we're not actually making advancement, because we're not actually in touch with what Krishna wants from us. And again, studying Shastra can come in many different forms. Directly from the book, it can come from the people who are explaining the book, etc. But we have to have that balance. So my motive was that I wanted to save up. I had a job. I wanted to save up enough money to have this preaching center centered around Shastric study. And in order to do that, in order to run such a center, I have to have a certain kind of job, because I need to have weekends off. I need to have summers off so that we can do like retreats. So I thought, okay, I'll be a teacher. It's within my nature anyway. That works. So I went to college, got the training, and constantly I was doing basically 10 years worth of me trying to make the situation favorable to do this particular service. Then Krishna, through Bhishma Dev, taught me that what I was doing there was, I was still thinking that I was in control, because I was thinking, what's the right kind of job in order to be able to do this, and what's the right kind of schedule, and the right kind of move, all of this. It was all me thinking, okay, I have to do this. If I can't rely on anyone else, so I have to do it myself. But that's the thing, I was relying on myself, not Krishna. And so as soon as I was able to show Krishna that I knew for a fact that it wasn't my endeavors which was going to produce the facility for this preaching center, as soon as I proved that to Krishna in whatever way I did, then all of the funds that I've been trying to raise for the previous 10 years became manifest within 3 months. And I was able to get the center where we then started some Shastric study. So, and this is how it is, where we think that we're doing something, our intentions are noble and pure, but there's just this little tinge of attachment, and it's natural. It's not actually our natural nature, but it's natural due to our conditioning to have this tendency to have some bit of control, right? We don't want to let go completely. And so this detachment, it's a tough one, and we have to learn it. And we have to learn it from pure devotees like Bhishma Dev. I personally learned that lesson from Bhishma Dev. Other devotees learn it from other devotees. But we have to get that. And and it's not just that we become detached and then all of a sudden we're detached from everything. We have to constantly understand that everything is Krishna's, nothing is ours. And as we go on, we become more and more detached from this idea that we are the controller, right? And as we successfully do that, then we know that, where we can take comfort in, we do our best according to what Shastra is giving us, and the rest is in Krishna's hands, right? And so, anyway, it's an important lesson. We have to learn it. I'm sure you've learned it to probably even a greater extent than I have. But just for the benefit of everyone else, this is an important instruction. How was that? Was that good? Are there still some?
That's very helpful, Prabhu. I'm thinking of how I was told when I joined the movement, which was I never met Prabhupada, so it was right when Prabhupada was leaving this world. I was told that Prabhupada said that these children who would be taking birth in our movement were very advanced souls, and perhaps demigods in a previous life, or renunciates. And so there was this kind of assumption on my part, and I think on the part of others, that if we just follow the process, they're going to take it up fully as adults. And yet, I think of Srila Prabhupada and his children, and there's just no guarantee, because we don't know what that particular soul has to go through to come around to really wanting Krishna in their lives. They may have to go through certain purificatory steps, in spite of the fact that they are coming from an advanced platform. If you chant your 50 rounds and you introduce them into this world in the proper way. So I guess I was just expecting this result.
Well, yes. And I can see why you would expect that result. But when we read through Srimad Bhagavatam and the activities of the Devatas, we can understand what their mentality is. Although they are quite favorable and they accept Vishnu as the supreme, they are very much into sense gratification. And sometimes they even forget and overstep culture, and the demons actually become more powerful than them. We read about that often. So it shouldn't be a surprise when the Devata children we have want a high standard of enjoyment, right? So no, it's exactly. I mean, you can see that yes, these children were definitely Devatas in their previous lives, and they still have a lot of that to work off. And and we can use these examples. So Indra, for example, transgressing the laws of etiquette, disobeying his guru, then or disrespecting his guru, and then killing his replacement guru, and then this so-called demon, who's quite frankly, he was a better devotee at that point than Indra, had to actually preach to him and say, look, you've made this special weapon from the bones of this brahmana specifically to kill me, and now you're trying to hit me with your weapon again? Come on. You have what you need. Use it, right? So these kids, they have what they need. They just don't necessarily know how to use it until they're preached to, even sometimes by a demon. So we do our best. We shouldn't be surprised. Because the thing is, we won't give birth to a pure devotee, because pure devotees don't take birth. We're going to get someone who was not quite finished with the path. Now, we might get someone who is quite close to finishing the path. But generally, they don't take birth when Krishna personally is not around, right? Generally, if you're just almost there, then you take birth where Krishna's pastimes are taking place currently. You get further training from the residents of Vrindavan. And if that training is successful, then you move on. If it's not, then again, you take birth where Krishna's pastimes are taking place. So although this is quite a unique time, this particular time that we've taken birth in, very unique. Krishna was just here, Lord Chaitanya was just here, and then we have the added bonus of our Srila Prabhupada. But yeah, this is what we're gonna have. We're gonna have people who are interested in spirituality and that have made some advancement, but still have a whole lot of work to do. And if we can identify exactly what work needs to be done, then that can become helpful. But that takes intelligence, and it takes understanding of these different pastimes that are given in the Shastra. And it also takes their willingness to follow it, right? Because even Indra following it still was messing up and had to be preached to by the so-called demon. So these pastimes are all there to let us know that even though we're on the right path, we may not be applying it properly, and we have to be very careful, because even very elevated souls make mistakes. And so thankfully for us, we have an opportunity to learn from their mistakes. Usually we have to make them ourselves, and then we still don't learn from them, unfortunately. But the opportunity is there, so there's hope. But yeah, I wouldn't feel, if I were you, I can't say that because there are certain things in my life that I have not been able to let go. But I would say it sounds to me like you've done a terrific job, and that yeah, keep up the good work. Really.
You're very gracious, Prabhu. I think the more we understand, on top of what you're saying, and thank you so much for your understanding and realization, and I'm hearing it and I'm absorbing it, so I appreciate that. But I think as well, if we can try to understand, be very sensitive to the nature of each of the children that we may be affecting, instead of just being so wrapped up in ourselves and our own spiritual advancement. And well, just one size fits all approach, I think is not a wise approach.
No.
So that takes sensitivity and intelligence and maturity.
Yes. So I'll close with one more thing, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because then this sort of gives a more complete idea of what's being discussed here. So there's this saying that when someone identifies as a hammer, all problems seem like nails, right? And so it just means that, like you said, people tend to focus on just their own experience of things. So when I was training to become a teacher, it was understood by actual proper teachers who were trying to show us what to do, that it's not a one size fits all. I teach one way, and you have to be able to learn the way I teach. Otherwise you get left behind, or you get put in some special needs class, or etc. A teacher is meant to understand the different learning styles. How do I reach each of these students, right? Because the principle is there, that's the important thing, but it has to be presented in different details, like we were talking before. Different cultures like that have different languages, different reasoning. So it's a teacher's responsibility to understand how to get through to each of those children. So some of them need more time separately. Some of them are better with the group. Some of them need direct instruction. Some of them need to be, very subtly led to the instruction. And it's our duty to understand that. So the example I give most, that anybody can relate to, because this one maybe teachers and some parents can relate to, but anyone can relate to, is if someone calls you up, a friend of yours, and they say, hey, I need directions to, let's just say, the Philadelphia Temple. Now, if I don't first say, okay, where are you? Then none of my instructions are going to be helpful, because I don't know where they're coming from, right? And so this is a very important thing when we're instructing people. It's also important for us when we're trying to learn. We have to know where we're coming from. That's Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana. Where am I in relation to what my goal is, and what's the process that I can take to get there? It applies here too. we shouldn't just instruct people based on what our experience is. I shouldn't give directions from where I am to the Philadelphia temple if you're not where I am. Right? So I have to determine where you are first. And that takes some time. It takes some intelligence. It sometimes takes some empathy when we're taking it out of the analogy and into the reality of the situation. And yeah, and all of that comes from studying Shastra, how to properly apply these things across different fields, and how to actually determine where someone's coming from. Because sometimes people will say, well, I'm coming from this place. But again, not in the analogy, real thing. But you can actually tell that no, they're coming from a different sort of place, right? So we have to be able to determine that too, sometimes better than they can. And so it's a challenging situation. But yeah, like you pointed out, that's an important thing to do. We can't just expect everyone to learn the way we did. We have to be able to understand where each individual is coming from, and then do our best and be sensitive about it and do our best to give them the principle in their language, if that makes sense. So thank you for bringing that out.
Thank you, Prabhu.
And I feel this conversation can continue going on, but we have gone over time, and I'm honestly happy with it. But I think we should probably end now. I look forward to further discussion. Very enlightening for me as well. Is there anything else anyone wants to add before we end?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Lot of points you discussed. Thank you very much.
I've had the great fortune of being in contact with so many great devotees with wonderful realizations. So I definitely can't take any of the credit whatsoever. If you knew me when I was a teenager, you'd know that there's no way I could have said anything that made any sense. So it's just the mercy of these devotees that I've had the great fortune of learning from, and of course Krishna's mercy that allowed me to actually assimilate some of these ideas. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Prabhu.
Okay, we'll end here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Panchakalpatarubhyasya kripasindhabhyev cha patitanam pavane Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Thank you,
All right.
Prabhu. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.